We are live.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another Grow With Us program. Just a few housekeeping things for today. You will be muted and your cameras will be turned off. But if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put those in the chat. I'm Vanessa with the Dallas Public Library, and we do this program in conjunction with the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability. And we very much enjoy our speaker that's coming up, but I will turn it over to Nedra to tell you a little bit more about her and about what we'll be talking about today. Thank you, Nedra.
Awesome. Thank you, thank you, Vanessa. I'm sorry. Thank you for being with us today. And we're very excited to continue our partnership with the Dallas Public Library to present this free program. My name is Nedra Richard Morgan, and I work for the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability. Our division is one of over 70 city departments and divisions within the city of Dallas, and our day-to-day focus is on environmental activities, processes, programs, and major plans such as the Comprehensive Environmental Climate Action Plan. Our program ranged from A to Z, air quality to water conservation to zero waste. Today, we welcome back Amanda Griffin from Smart Outdoor Services. She is an irrigation expert in Dallas, but has customers throughout the state. Thank you so much for being on our program today for the second part of our water conservation series. Amanda excels in helping her customers save water and still have beautiful landscapes. She and her team incorporate native plants and water-saving components into the projects and revitalizations. As we all know, clean water is essential to growing plants, and it provides us with quality of life here in the U.S. Edibles in our gardens are a popular trend for this year. Adding to your existing irrigation system might require expert touch. Ponds and wildlife watering holes are also gaining in popularity to help keep our pollinators and bird populations thriving, as well as other small wildlife supplied with water. Signs of climate change are becoming part of each season of the year, so it's important to understand your sprinkler system so that you can make adjustments when required. Remember though, in Dallas, you can only water twice weekly using your automated system, but you can water by hand at any time of the day or night. With the right sprinkler system, you won't have anything to worry about. Even when you go on vacation, your lawn and your plants will remain lush in water. Before you decide to add a residential sprinkler system to your property, it is a good idea to understand a few facts about sprinkler systems. Let's take a closer look at some of the most important things you should know about sprinklers. Today's guest speaker, Amanda Griffin, founder of a Smart Outdoor, will share strategies and tips about using sprinklers in the most efficient way to get the maximum amount of benefit while using the least amount of water. Amanda Griffin was inspired to start the company after she saw a need for active water management and impactful water education. Her passion about smart water solution and her energy and enthusiasm are contagious. As an EPA WaterSense partner and certified irrigation contractor, she has worked in the green industry for 13 years. That includes landscape irrigation auditor certification and certified landscaping irrigation auditor certification. Please help me welcome Amanda Griffin to the virtual podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be back and happy to be sharing with you some more information about irrigation systems for your homes and your yards. Let's jump right in. We've got a lot to cover, and I want to be able to have time for your questions at the end of the session. A little bit about me. If you've tuned into City of Dallas classes before, you know a little bit about this. I am a certified irrigation contractor and landscape irrigation auditor, as Nedra discussed. My husband and I were among the very first EPA WaterSense partners in Texas, so I'm proud of that. I did used to teach school. I taught middle school for 4 years before I joined my husband in our water conservation company. And I was executive director of our state irrigation association for 5 years. So I have been in the industry even more than 13 years. Now I'm up to almost 20 years experience in the water industry, and I've enjoyed getting to know all of the professionals in the industry and educating homeowners like yourself to water in a more conscientious way to improve our water ethic here in the North Texas region. Our company specializes in water management. We do evaluations, regular irrigation inspections, and we can consult on needs that you may have for renovation, efficiency improvements for your systems. We primarily work for homeowners associations these days, and we are definitely certifiable sprinkler nerds. We love to talk about sprinklers, and we know a lot about them. So let's get right into it. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about irrigating native and adaptive plants in your landscape. I'm a huge advocate for these types of plants because they do have a much reduced water need compared to some of the common landscape plants that are used in Dallas area landscapes. So we'll talk a little bit about those. We're going to talk about the relationship with your soil and your irrigation system. And then finally, I left time in my presentation to talk about drip. The last 3 classes that I did for City of Dallas, I teased a little bit about drip and said, oh, we'll talk about that in a future session. And today's the day. So if you've tuned in your winter chicken dinner, we're going to talk about drip this morning. Let's talk a little bit about native plants in the irrigated landscape. Now, I'm not a native plant expert, but I know some people who are. So I wanted to provide you with this list of wonderful resources for native and adaptive plants and plants that do well in the North Texas region. There are a host of excellent resources for you to use, and I've listed some of those for you here. There's some different names or labels on plants that are better in the Texas environment. Native plants are definitely a great choice because once they get established, they're bulletproof because they have evolved over ages to live in these areas. The Native Plant Society of Texas has a lot of resources on their website. They divide Texas into regions, so you can look up what plants are native to your specific region. Texas Nursery Landscape Association has a best of guide on their website with plants that are native, adaptive, and just well suited for the North Texas environment. So that's a great resource for you to use. Wildflower.org is an organization that advocates for native plants and wildflowers. If you're interested in doing a meadow look, that would be a great resource for you. Texas AgriLife has plants that they call Earth Kind, and they have actually a whole host of resources on that webpage as well. And then Texas Smartscape is another resource for you to look at if you're looking at making some landscape changes and your focus is going more towards plants that will have a reduced water need. These are some excellent places to start. So I can put this slide up at the end if you don't have time to jot them down now. And of course, they'll always be available on our recorded session later on YouTube. So let's talk about when you switch your landscape over to native plants or adaptive plants, plants that are really conditioned to live in the environment that we live in the Dallas area. There's a couple of things to keep in mind as you're setting yourself up for success. Native plants still need irrigation typically through the 3rd year. They really need to get established and get those root structures in place. And so don't think that you can just plant a native and forget about it. It is grown in a nursery just like other landscaping plants, and it still needs that good foundational structure of water in its life cycle for at least the first 3 years. Once a plant is well established after that 3rd year, you might need occasional water You may need to water if it's in times of drought or we've had a really dry spell. You can water those natives. A lot of natives, once they get established after that 3 years, they don't want a whole lot of water. You can actually kill them by overwatering them, as likely as you are to underwater them. The root structures of native and adaptive plants are so important, and they are the secret ingredient to a successful native garden, is really promoting those root structures. That's why we're going to talk about soil here in a little while, because I want to talk to you about promoting an environment that's going to really encourage those natives to be successful, and a large piece of that is the root structures. Hydrozoning is also important. When you are thinking about making a change from a traditional landscape that may or may not be super water hungry, but you're switching over to something that's a little more native or adaptive, hydrozoning those plants in similar areas is going to be important. If you just plug in one little native guy in a landscape bed that's full of plants that aren't native, they're going to have very different water needs. And you're going to have a difficult time balancing the application of that water so that you don't drown that native while you're getting the rest of those plants as much water as they need, and vice versa. You don't want to overwater the native because you're having to water all the flowers around it that need more water. So we're going to talk a little bit about hydrozones, what that means, and how you can improve the hydrozones in your property. And my last little bullet here is, once they're established, a lot of them can only need water in times of extreme drought. And if you have any other kind of landscape plants on your yard, you're probably going to water plenty for your natives because you're watering the rest of that landscape. If you go to all native landscape, then you are going to be head and shoulders above the rest as far as your water use. You're going to reduce your water use drastically. So let's talk a little bit about soils. So I'm going to build a time machine and take you back to 7th grade life science. We're going to talk a little bit about soil types and how water reacts with the soil when you're watering. On the screen, you'll see a diagram of 3 different types of soil particles. We've got clay soils there on the left. We have our loam soil in the middle, and our sand. Now, the little black circles in the center, those are drip irrigation, a cross section of drip irrigation. We're going to talk a little bit about drip in here in just a bit, but I wanted to show these images because it shows you what the behavior of water in different types of soil. So if you have a very clay soil, a lot of North Texas has that blackland prairie gumbo soil that's super has a lot of clay particles. Clay particles are the smallest soil particle, and they there's less air and water space in between each particle because they're so small they can just fill in together. So you can see when you water on a clay, it happens to be turf grass. When you water that turf grass, the water has a tendency to move to the left and right and create a larger circle because those clay particles are so close together that the absorption rate is slower than other soil particles. If you look at loam is sort of like the sweet spot in soils. So if you have any beds that have been amended with expanded shale, or you've put compost and topsoil or gardening soil into your flower beds, you may have more of a loam situation in your bed. And you can see the water's percolating a little deeper, and the horizontal profile of the water is a little smaller. So it's able to go a little deeper, and the absorption rate's a lot faster than a clay soil. Sandy soil has the largest size particles in sand, which means they have the largest air and water spaces between those sand particles. And so the water penetrates pretty deeply, and the horizontal profile is much smaller. So you can see the space between the drip emitter lines varies depending on what kind of soil you have. And that's going to keep your water application consistent throughout the soil profile if you keep in mind what kind of soil you have. This picture is showing drip on turf grass. I'm really thinking about drip in your flower beds this session as you are changing out your regular landscape plants with native and adaptive plants. So in those areas, you're going to have drip. They'll be well covered with mulch. We'll talk a lot about mulch today. And if you're going to drip those beds, then you can keep those spacing in mind as you're thinking about how densely planted your landscape beds are going to be. So it's really important to note that the type of soil you have is going to determine how quickly that water percolates down through your system. Let's talk about root structures for just a minute. I saw this. I just recently did a native plant training, in fact, last week, and they had this diagram or a diagram very similar to it, and I just fell in love with what it's demonstrating for you. All of these plants here along the right-hand side they're calling them, these are prairie plants in this diagram. Many of these prairie plants are native plants to Texas. Look at those root structures. They are long, they are dense, they are thick, and they keep those native plants alive without water, without artificial irrigation. So as you're establishing native type plants, you can see why your soil structure is so important, because these plants go deep, and when they do go deep, they can pull water from a much larger area underground than your turf grass can. Take a look at this teeny tiny little section over here on the very left hand side. Look at that root structure. It's not even a foot deep. That's your turf grass. That's your St. Augustine grass. That's your Bermuda grass. That's your zoysia grass, that the common yard type turf that's used in North Texas. Someday, I hope that we move more towards a landscape that's more diverse and adaptive, like the plants that are here in this diagram, and move away from these huge expanses of just little bitty turf grass. Our carbon capture could be so much more with plants that are metabolizing more energy with these wonderful root structures. You can water them less frequently because they've got these huge foundational root structures that can keep them collecting water in between those water times. And if you're watering turf grass like this, you really just need to deliver water to the 3 or 4 or 5 inches in the soil, because that's as far as those roots can go. That's just a symptom or the characteristic of the species of turf. So you don't really need to water as deep to keep turf alive. You can water deep to keep those roots pushing and climbing and following that water, but their natural root structures are just so much more shallow than these plants. And that's why these plants are so resilient. That's why they can last through a drought. They can go longer between your sprinkler cycles. Once these root systems get established, then you've got all of that life happening under your soil. So I just think this is a beautiful diagram of the differences in root systems. So I wanted to show that to you. Let's talk a little bit about hydrozones. This is a diagram of a properly hydrozoned landscape, okay? All of the high water demand plants are here together. They're calling this is probably turf grass, and it's planted here together, and it has a high water demand. You've got some shrubs in this upper right corner and lower left corner. They have a moderate water demand. And then you've got these larger shrubs or trees here in the upper left with a low water demand. We would refer to this yard that this diagram is depicting as a properly hydrozoned system, because we can water this zone moderately, we can water this zone in a lot, and we can water this zone moderately. We can water this zone all by itself and maybe only schedule it once a week or once every 2 weeks. So it's very easy to write your water schedules if all of your plants are grouped together by water demand. Now, unfortunately, a lot of us weren't around when our original landscapes for our properties were going in, so we may not have had control over which plants are grouped together. Okay, so you may have, moderate demand shrubs out here in the middle of turf, and they're watering on the same zone, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that because they're watering on the same zone. So in order to keep that turf alive, you may have to overwater those shrubs, or vice versa. Your turf may struggle because you're trying to cut back on the water to give these shrubs just what they need. Now, the reason I'm showing this to you, even though you may already be into a landscape that is not properly hydrozoned, as you're making those decisions and as you're thinking about, upgrading your landscape or doing a landscape renovation and adding new landscape, you can keep these hydrozones in mind. If you're doing it yourself, read about the plants that you're planting and what their water needs are. There's other factors to consider than just water. You want to think about how much sunlight. If that's a part shade or full sun plant, those need to be in the full sun area of your yard. If you put a plant that needs to be in part shade and full sun, that plant's going to struggle. So you want to use those zones in your yard and plant the right plant in the right place. I think I told the story last week. We've had a client before. We went and advised them on their irrigation system for the first time, and they showed us this one part of their yard and said, we have to replace these plants here every year. It just seems like every year that we have to replace this. And it was the wrong plant for the wrong place. So, and they hadn't updated their sprinkler system. They spent money on plants year after year after year, and their landscaper never thought to turn on their irrigation system and see if there was water there that would keep those plants alive. So I say that to say, don't assume that your landscape maintenance person that comes every week and mows your yard is thinking about these things. And when you hire a landscape professional to do a design for your yard, ask about hydrozones and let them know that you want to water as efficiently as possible. So you're interested in the plants that have similar water needs to be in those same areas. Now, if you already have a yard that's all mixed up and there's things that drown if you keep the plant next to it alive, I've got some middle of the road solutions that might help you address that we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. But I wanted to give you that new word in your vocabulary, the hydrozones. That's when we're thinking about the plants according to water need, as we're thinking about where we put them in your landscape. So hydrozones is important. You also want to think about sun exposure. That's also important, particularly with native and adaptive plants. You want to put them in the location where they're going to be able to have the best chance of survival by putting them in the right place with the right amount of water. So I wanted to give you that new vocabulary word, hydrozones, so that as you're considering your plant purchases at your nursery this year, or you're hiring a landscape professional to help you remodel a portion of your landscape or your flower beds, or maybe you're removing some of your turf to expand your beds into more of a native bed. I'm a big proponent for diversity in your landscape and not just one monoculture of, only turf grass and 3 kinds of shrubs. A more diverse landscape supports the urban wildlife that are in your yard, and you'll build resiliency. Different plants require different minerals and nutrients from the soil. So when you have a diverse population in your soil, it increases the diversity of the flora and fauna, the micro biome in your soil. So I'm a big proponent of diverse lawns and not monoculture lawns. And again, those landscape links, those plant links that I gave you earlier in the presentation are going to be great sources for you to look at as you're thinking about how to make your landscape more diverse. So those are some good resources for you. Let's talk about drip irrigation. Finally, we've arrived at the day that we're going to talk about drip. So drip irrigation is a great fit on areas where you have hardscape overspray, okay? Where you have spray heads or rotor heads that are getting your windows wet, or your fence, or the side of your house, or your sidewalks. Areas where things are getting oversprayed may be a great fit for drip, particularly flower beds along your house, where when those spray heads pop up, they're just watering your windows. That water is going to seep into any available space in your window, or where your caulk may be kind of dried and shrunk, and then it can cause damage to your windows over time. So that drip is a good option to think about if you've got windows with water damage on them. If you have a small bed or a small space that's surrounded on all sides by hardscape, drip can be a good fit there. If you have a landscape bed where the plants have grown so tall that the spray heads are on the bottom now, and they're not over the plants anymore, they're under. Now you may want to spray that understory area of a taller landscape. But a lot of times what can happen is that one shrub is kind of in front of that sprinkler head and it outgrows its space. And so that sprinkler is just spraying on that one shrub, and all the shrubs around it begin to suffer because they're not getting any of that water because of deflection. We call that deflection in the sprinkler system. So if you've outgrown your spray height, drip could be a good conversion there. Native landscapes absolutely is a great fit for drip. If you're going to put efficient plants in, you may as well use the most efficient sprinkler option there. In areas where water restrictions are likely, and cities that have water contingency plans ready to go in cases of drought, most of the data that I'm reading are indicating that we could continue into drought conditions through the summer. So it's very likely that North Texas Municipal Water District and Dallas Water Utilities and Tarrant Regional Water District may have to invoke some water restrictions if we get into a drought situation. Remember, those water sources are there to flush your toilets and fight fires. And that's a bigger priority than your landscape. And aren't we glad that we want to have that water source available to us? And we're also putting drinkable water on our landscape. So in cases of water restrictions, drip is a great option because it virtually eliminates runoff. And in many areas, you can water with drip even after overhead spraying heads are not allowed due to the water restrictions. I'm not 100% sure what the Dallas water restrictions, which phases can use drip irrigation when you can't use overspray. You can look those up for your individual city on your city website. Now, we've talked a little bit about as you're moving towards your native landscape, you may have plants in the same area or that's serviced by the same sprinklers that have different water needs. Drip is a great option to make up those variances in water need. It's not the ideal solution. You would want to, redesign that bed in order to accommodate those plants. But sometimes we don't have the budget to do that. And drip is a great opportunity to help make up some of those water need differences between your native plants and your regular landscape plants. Because if you're like me, you do some of those projects a little at a time. You might do one bed this year, see how it goes. You might do another bed. If you are curious about native plants and how they look in the landscape or how easy they are to take care of, I would encourage you to pick one bed and convert it to all natives. Native plants look really great in about year 3. So don't give up. If you plant natives this year and you think they look kind of puny, don't give up on them and replace them with thirsty plants that aren't intended to live in the North Texas area. Give it some time, give it some love, water those natives those first 3 years, and then after year 3, it's just going to be a fireworks show for you. They're going to take off and they're going to be beautiful. There's, depending on the plants that you use, there's color all year round. You're going to attract the birds and the bees and the hummingbirds and the wildlife that live in your neighborhood. They are attracted to those native plants, and you're really doing a service for your community when you provide those little pockets of ecosystem for the wildlife in our area. So we're going to talk about drip, and I'm going to tell you where those great fit options can take you. Now, drip sometimes gets a bad rap. Drip is probably the #1 sprinkler strategy or component that I hear complaints about. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about drip's greatest hits. These are the things that people hit drip on the most. In my experience, talking to people about how they feel about drip that they have at their house already, or how they feel about converting potential sprinkler areas to drip. A lot of people complain about their drip and they just say, I just can't keep up. It just doesn't water enough. It seems like I run it and it just can't put down enough water. Sometimes this is a design issue, and whoever put in your drip, whether it was you or whether it was an irrigation professional or your lawn guy who maybe isn't licensed but did that job for you, they may not have put enough drip lines into your bed. But a lot of times this complaint with drip is really just a scheduling issue. Drip waters in gallons per hour, and every other sprinkler type waters gallons per minute. Okay, so most drip, there's 3 different kinds of drip as far as the application rate, and that's 0.4 gallons per hour, so almost a half gallon per hour. 0.6 is a little over half a gallon an hour coming out of those emitters. And then the majority of drip, I believe, that is used in landscape beds is usually 0.9. So that's almost a gallon per hour coming out of those drip emitters. Okay, now that doesn't sound like very much, but you can definitely, you need to watch the drip, especially the first few watering cycles, to make sure you're watering enough. What you want is that soil image that we looked at before, where the wet spots coming out of the drip are touching each other. One wet spot is ending about where the other wet spot is beginning. You want that overlap so that you moisturize that entire soil profile. So usually when people complain that their drip doesn't water enough, they need to adjust their drip schedules. Likewise, people complain about drip and they say it waters too much. They say, well, yeah, this drip is supposed to be so efficient, but it runs over the curb too. So drip can only do what you tell it to do. Okay, it's not conscious. So if you're scheduling it too long, it can water too much, just like any other emitter type. Okay, so if you have a drip situation that seems to water too much, you may be over designed for that space, but a lot of times that can just be addressed with scheduling. You may be watering it too long, or you may be watering it too close together, or you may be watering it too many times in your schedule in one day, not allowing that water to percolate nice and deep. So a lot of times when people complain that drip waters too much, it's really just a scheduling issue, and it can definitely be addressed. Even if the drip that was installed in your system is not the best design, sometimes you can overcome those deficiencies through creative scheduling. Another complaint that I get about drip is that it doesn't water evenly. It waters too much over here and it doesn't water enough over here. Again, usually that's a design issue. Drip has got to be installed correctly, just like anything else. If you don't connect your washing machine to the water source, it's not going to work right. If it's installed backwards, it's not going to clean your clothes, right? A sprinkler system is an electrical, hydraulic, mechanical system that's in your home, and it's got to be designed properly. Now, the good news about drip is if you have a poor drip design, it's usually pretty economical to tear it out and start over. You typically drip in a landscape bed sits on the soil grade of your landscape bed, and then it gets covered with mulch. So to redo that drip doesn't require digging a whole bunch of trenches like making changes in a spray zone might require. So a lot of times you can make changes to your drip design, and we're going to talk a little bit about drip components in just a few minutes. But typically, if you have drip that doesn't water evenly, you may have a check valve situation. If your landscape is sloped, all that water could be running out of that drip when it shuts off, causing your wet spot here and dry spot here. Those can all be addressed with drip components. People complain sometimes that rabbits or rats chew through their drip, and we're going to see this as an ongoing problem as the drought persists, because those animals are just looking for life-saving water. Typically, if you keep your drip buried in plenty of mulch, that is somewhat of a deterrent, and those animals are a little less likely, it's a little harder for them to find it. They'll still find it. If drought persists, this is going to be an ongoing issue. In a lot of areas where they've got a lot of drip and they've had these issues, their solution has been to supply an easier access water source for those animals. So if you are fortunate enough to live along a green space, or you've got a vibrant wildlife population in your property, then think about supplying water for some of the animals in your yard, that if they can easily go to a bird bath or some kind of water source in your yard, they're going to be a lot less likely to dig around in your flower bed and chew up your mulch. The good thing about drip is those areas where it gets chewed on, you can cut them on either side and patch that drip along if you need to. It's relatively easy to fix. And again, a good mulching is going to it's going to discourage them, okay? It may not stop them altogether, but I can't say enough about mulch with drip irrigation. Mulch, 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 mulch. I wish I knew it in 9 languages. I would say it again. Mulch is completely necessary, and I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why. Mulch is necessary on your drip irrigation. Number one, the plastic that drip is made out of is not UV resistant. So if you've got exposed drip in your landscape, it is degrading through UV damage today. And you're just reducing the life of your drip lines if you don't keep those covered. They are not rated for UV. So you want to keep that drip covered to protect the lines themselves from UV degradation. Next, as those drip lines are dripping out the water from their little emitters, that you don't want that water to just evaporate off. You want it to go down into the soil and moisturize your soil profile to encourage those lovely deep roots that we're looking for in those native landscapes. So mulch is going to work as an insulation layer over your soil. It's going to keep your soil surface cooler. It's going to keep the sun from just baking out all of the good organisms that live in your top inch of soil. That mulch is going to insulate the soil from that sunlight, from the hot temperatures. It's also going to reduce evaporation from your drip emitters. So you're going to save water with mulch. We like to advise people to ask for 3 inches of mulch, because when your yard guy comes along to blow your flower beds, he's going to blow about 1 inch away. But if you've got 3 inches of mulch in your landscape beds, it's typically going to be enough to cover your drip, insulate your soil, and it's going to stay even through the blowing with the electric blowers. What that mulch does is it creates a little carpet. It settles in together and it creates a little carpet of insulation. And then where the mulch is next to the soil, it begins to break down and it adds nutrients to your soil. So mulch is a must. If you're going to plan on doing drip, you want to put mulch in and you want to keep mulch in. So you may need to reapply mulch, once a year, depending on how much your landscape beds are getting blown with the blower. When people say, oh, I got this drip in here, but it's never really worked. It's never worked very well. There's 2 problems that they're typically describing when they have this complaint that I have found in my experience consulting on residential landscapes. Typically, if this is your complaint about drip, when your landscaper came and installed the plants in that bed, I'll tell you what they probably didn't do, which is why they set you up for not as much success in your drip landscape. They didn't water in the plants. Okay, when they first install those plants, they've got to really deeply water and fill up that soil profile with moisture. Okay, it's very, very difficult for drip because it applies water so slowly to catch up that entire soil profile on just a regular sprinkler schedule, okay? Drip is designed so that you have a moisturized profile and you lose a little bit of water every day. The plants take it up in their root systems, it evaporates off. The plants use it up and transpire it out into the air. So if you have this moisturized layer of soil and it's fully moisturized and you lose a little bit, the drip puts it back, and you lose a little bit and the drip puts it back. If that entire soil profile is dried out and you've got new plants in the ground there, it's going to be almost impossible for that drip to catch it up. So typically when people have this complaint about drip, their grow-in schedule was not set up properly and their landscaper did not water in the new beds that are being served by drip irrigation adequately. So that's something that's really important because, these poor people have lost landscape and it's all avoidable problems with drip. If you can get your drip installed properly, designed properly for your bed, and scheduled properly, it's going to be your favorite. And clients that have well installed drip and well scheduled drip, they don't have complaints about drip, except maybe the rabbits. But these other issues with drip are absolutely addressable and shouldn't keep you from trying drip in your landscape. So let's take a look at this drip. Now this is drip in, again, it looks like a turf area. It looks like they took a cross section of turf and planted drip. I wanted to use this picture to show you a little bit about the drip application. So in the middle of each one of these circles here is a drip emitter, an inline emitter, okay? You want to run drip long enough so that the water that comes out of this emitter goes all the way across to this emitter, okay? This circle here is this emitter. You want this emitter's water to meet up with this next emitter. Just like we talk about in a spray head zone, we talk about wanting head-to-head coverage. We want this sprinkler head and this sprinkler head's water to go to the other head, right? If it just barely meets in the middle, what are you going to have? You're going to have a dry spot. Same thing with drip. You want it to be emitter to emitter coverage. You want the water from this emitter to meet up with this emitter to meet up with this emitter. That way you get a nice, even application of water, okay? This drip would be buried in the ground underneath this turf here. and you can see some of the alternate parts of a drip. This is a filtration system. You want to filter it in because those drip emitters are teeny tiny. I always tell people they look like a mitochondria. They've got all these little trails that slow that water down so that when it gets to that emitter, it's just dripping out one small drip at a time. So it's really interesting to look at. And that's how it delivers water so slowly. So typically you need a pressure regulator and a filter going into your drip zone so that it helps slow that water down and filters out any tiny particles that could potentially clog up your emitters here. So here's drip line that it looks like when you buy it in the store. You can see the little holes here. These holes are typically, they're 12 inches apart from each other, or they're 18 inches apart from each other. Now it's important to know which kind of drip you have so that you can schedule it appropriately so that those wet spots meet. Now this image here I wanted to show you, we use this type of setup. This is called a manifold, and it has these tiny tubes, so we call these spaghetti tubes, that come out from the manifold, and then they go to a single emitter that's going for a single plant. You can see in this particular example, we've got a line going out that looks like it's watering this little flower here. We've got this line coming around here to water this little flower here, and they drip out. So you can see a close-up of this point source emitter. They call this an emitter point source because you put it at the point that you want it to water, the exact plant that you want it to water. So this is a different type of drip system than this system that you see up here, the inline drip system. If you're going to use an inline drip system, then you're going to lay it out a little differently than this point source. This point source, you may have one of these little button emitters here, this point source emitter, or you might have 2 or 3. This is used a lot in pots. If you have pots around your pool or pots along your back porch or your front porch, your landscape or irrigation professional may have put these in your pots, and you might have all 6 of these emitters in one pot, you know, servicing different plants within that pot. These are also forms of micro irrigation that kind of fit into the same category as drip irrigation, and we call these spike sprays. This is a spike that you can push down into the mulch. You can see it's pushed down in the mulch here, and it's a little micro spray. It's spraying out like a spray head, but that application area is very, very small. Again, this can be used in flower beds, and this is just a different nozzle on the same spike spray, just applying water a little slower. These are also typically adjustable, so you can make this application area smaller or larger depending on how much space you're trying to water or how many plants you need to water. So those are some great options also. Here's a spike spray out of the ground. This is what this looks like when it's pulled out of the ground. So you can shove that in the soil, and it will spray water out, you know, in your precise location where you're watering those natives. I found this wonderful image at this old house, and I wanted to share it with you guys because it's really a really nice example of spacing and different types of drip in the landscape. So you can see this is a landscape bed with different types of landscape plants. And now this is, in this example, they're using a hose end drip system. That's a valid system for you to use if you're putting it in for yourself. If you have an irrigation controller in your garage, you already have an irrigation system, then this drip would probably more likely be tied into that system than your hose bib. But in this particular situation, they're showing homeowners how to do a drip tie-in with a hose bib connection source. So here they've got a loop of drip around a tree. You can see they're ready here with their mulch. They're going to cover it with 2 inches of mulch Man, this old house, guys, they're so on it. That's exactly, remember I said you want to put on 3 inches so that you end up with 2. That 1 inch is going to get blown away with the blower. So they've got inline drip here around a tree. Now notice they didn't hug that right around the trunk of the tree. You don't want to create a bowl and put your drip too close to the trunk, because where are the roots for that tree? They're way out here. They're all around the tree, creating that strong foundation for your biome, keeping that tree alive. So you want to spread your drip out far away from the trunk of the tree. Different experts have different guidelines, but one good rule I've heard is about halfway out of the canopy of the tree. So if you're planting a new tree, this drip loop may need to change over time. As your tree grows and the tree canopy expands, it's not going to need water right there, right around its trunk. And in fact, if you just water right there around the trunk, you're going to slow down the expansion of your tree roots. You really want to push them out so that they grow longer and faster and more resilient, and pick up water from all around this yard. So this is a great example of a loop around your tree, but keep in mind, you may need to expand that over time. Here they've got inline emitters woven throughout their plants. Now this is where I wanted to show you just a quick little trick. If you've got plants in your bed, they're regular landscape plants that need to be watered twice a week, and you devote one corner to some natives, and maybe they don't need as much water, you can always cap the heads on that side of your landscape bed and just add some point source emitters for those individual native plants. Like I said, it's not going to be the most ideal situation, but when you're retrofitting, sometimes you have to, make it better than it was, and don't do that complete remodel. So adding some of those point source emitters on the plants that need a little more water, maybe on your regular landscape side, or eliminating your overspraying heads on that native side and just doing point source emitters only. So I wouldn't normally advise that you run sprays and drip on the same zone, but depending on what your landscape needs are in that particular bed, it's a good middle of the road solution to not drown those natives while you're watering those other plants. So some of those middle of the road solutions can be applied as you're transitioning into a more native landscape. So I thought this was a great image. It shows the end clamp at the end of your drip line. It shows that spaghetti tubing that we're talking about with the spike spray going into the plants on the porch there, the patio. And then with these point source emitters, you can do multiple ones. This is a camellia plant here or a rose bush. You may want to put 2 or 3 of these point source emitters around it. You can really customize the application according to the plant need. So I thought this was a great example of drip spacing. So I've got some drip examples here, real drip applications that show places where drip delivered great solutions. And this is one. You can see this is a really skinny bed down here, and then gets kind of wider on this end, and then it goes immediately to a really skinny bed that's full of shrubs there. This is an oddly shaped area. If we were going to put spray heads in this area, they would be going over this sidewalk. They'd be, spraying out into the street. They'd be getting over this curb maybe. They'd be getting on the seating here where people might want to sit. So drip is a great opportunity for this. If you have an oddly shaped area, drip is a great solution. Here's another wonderful application of drip. I love this picture because it looks like it's a time warp. It looks like it's from about 1970, but it is a successful drip application along this sidewalk. And look what else it's eliminating. No overspray on these windows. So that water is being delivered right down here underneath the canopy of these trees. They've probably got some more emitters on these plants than they do these larger, looks like those are some kind of yucca. So you can customize it for these skinny beds, not have overspray on the sidewalk, not have overspray on your windows. Here's a perfect window example. They're watering, this looks like vinca or Asian jasmine there. They're not having to have the window washers out every week because they're not overspraying on those windows, and they're not getting that calcification on the windows that you see when you've got water everywhere. Look at this house here. The sprinklers have hit this fence, you know, twice a week for who knows how long, and it's bleached out the fence. You can eliminate issues like this by putting drip in these areas instead of spray heads. In the state of Texas, if you have an irrigated area, a landscaped area that's more narrow than, I believe it's 48 inches, then in Texas, if you're getting a new system today, that size of a landscaped area would be required to have drip, even if it's turf, even if it's not bedding plants. If it's turf, you'd have to do drip in it. So there's a lot of drip installed under turf in a lot of the newer neighborhoods in North Texas. Some of it's applied wonderfully and the grass has never looked better. And then, you know, if it's not applied correctly, those homeowners have some issues. This is a great example of a place to put drip, because if you had spray heads all along this, it could cause a potential tripping hazard. So drip can eliminate that. You're not going to have risers sticking up everywhere for someone to accidentally kick or hit with their skateboard or wrap their dog leash around it. So drip is a good solution for that. This is healthy plant growth. This is a dripped bed. I mean, it's beautiful. This is obviously not in Texas. They've got some plants that may not be native to Texas, but this is a pretty kind of a more formal looking wildflower kind of a bed with some natives for this particular area. They're watering these plants separate than their turf. It's hydrozoned well. So here's a grow in for just to show you. I know we're almost out of time. And Vanessa or Nedra, hop in if anybody's got any questions. But here's an area that, this is a hot area. I believe this is in California. You've got a hot sidewalk on this side and a hot highway on this side. And these plants are really struggling. Okay, about 6 months later, they put drip in and look how it's thriving. It's got water, it's not overspraying, it's not creating a car wash situation in this neighborhood, and those plants are just thriving. Here's drip on a brick wall. You can see the drip newly installed here along these little ledges to water this creeping something on the wall, and then look how it just takes off. Even on this hot wall, that drip has encouraged and advocated the growth of these plants. So now it's a beautiful green space. This is an excellent place that you could put drip so that all of these cars don't get washed out every day. Look at all the overspray on the hardscape. This would be a great place to put drip. And look at this. I always use this picture because of the beautiful rainbow. It's like a water feature. You could splash around here with your 2-year-old, but that's really not what this property owner probably wants to do with their hard-earned water money, is water the sidewalk. And with this brick sidewalk, that water is going to run into all those little crevices, and then when it gets cold or it's going to freeze, it's going to cause damage to the sidewalk. It's going to reduce the longevity of this hardscape. It's going to discolor this street sign. Overspray is a bad deal, y'all. So this would be a great opportunity. They could drip this area and it would eliminate this overspray altogether. Okay, we've approached our last slide. I'd love to answer questions, help you out with problems. If you have anything, any needs that you have, I encourage you to go to the Dallas Irrigation Association website, dallasia.org, and find an irrigator that serves your neighborhood. They can help with drip conversions, and many of them can help with drip problems. If you have existing drip and you need some help, reach out to a licensed Texas irrigator. The larger box stores also carry a lot of drip components. If you want to try to do it yourself, take a look. YouTube's got a lot of videos. Whatever brand drip you buy, I guarantee you they've got a YouTube channel to help you along your drip journey. So appreciate y'all's time. Have a wonderful day. Are there any questions before we go?
Yes, Amanda, thank you so much. That was amazing information. I think you were very thorough, and hopefully it inspires people to maybe switch out some of their sprinklers with some drip irrigation. So yeah, someone said that they have an older system that could definitely use some areas changed to drip, and they thank you for the great information, the ideas, and the examples. Yeah, I think it always helps. I'm a visual person, to help see like the spaces that drip irrigation does work really well for. And I found it interesting about the mulch and I didn't even think about rabbits and other critters chewing on your drip tape and drip line.
It's very common, especially in HOA common areas that are along the edges of neighborhoods. We see a lot of rodent damage can be common in those areas. That's why we keep them buried with mulch.
Yes, it's also good to know that there is a fairly easy fix for that too, so you don't have to replace everything if you get the damage.
Yes, yes.
I just how do the drip lines do in freezing conditions? Do you just drain your lines?
Well, typically when you have drip professionally installed, it has a emitter at the end that can flush out the water, and so drip is it's a very, very low likelihood that drip will freeze. The material that it's made out of is pretty freeze resistant, and especially if it's insulated down in mulch, you're not going to have a high incident of freeze. But the good news is, if your drip does freeze or if it does get damaged, you can go back to the header, the primary place where the drip connects into your system, cut that off, cut your whole drip system out, and you can replace that drip, not have to dig a bunch of holes in your yard. You can just replace that surface drip in your landscape bed.
Awesome. All right, last call for any questions for Amanda. I think you did a pretty thorough job, so I don't think there's a lot of questions.
All right.
All right, yes, thank you so much for joining us. So we won't have a Grow With Us next week, but we'll return on April 11th, and I'll be sure to share all the details with that as soon as we have them. So thank you. Yes, I know it's hard to think about your irrigation maybe necessarily right now when the weather's so pretty. We've had rain recently, but definitely for the summer, now is the time to get it in line before you need it.
Absolutely.
All right, well, everyone enjoy the beautiful day that we're having today. It's a little bit cooler than it was yesterday, but everything is nice and blooming right now. So get out there and enjoy the outdoors. And Amanda talked last time about watching your sprinkler system. You know, I don't think we're gonna have any rain this week, so this would be a great time if you're running your sprinkler system this week to check it out and see where you can improve it.
Wonderful. Well, you guys have a great afternoon, and go out and check those sprinklers.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.